Okay. Hello Groveland. Today's video is being done on December the 11th, and I thought we would take this opportunity for those of you who weren't able to attend the Township Board meeting. We had announced at the November Board meeting that we planned to do a review of the fire departments that we've been analyzing for about a year now, and we were going to do it at the December meeting. So at the December meeting we did that review, and this is basically that information. So if you weren't able to attend, I thought you might want to see what we were looking at the fire department and what some of the issues are, and we've been studying it for about a year. First of all, the purpose of the study was really threefold. It was to review the current fire department operations as a standalone operation, because we're no longer doing the Village of Holly or the runs we used to do some years ago into Genesee County. All of that's gone. We're back to doing just Groveland Townships, because most of those other runs really never worked out for us anyway. We're just back to Groveland Township, and we wanted to look at both the short-term and the long-term needs of both the community and the personnel in the fire department. The purpose of this was really to kind of take a look at the fire department and see what is the financial sustainability of the fire department, the way it's structured. Our fire millage, which was on a 10-year time frame, is expiring. We have to have an election later this year for the renewal of fire millages to go forward with the fire services. So we thought this was a particularly good time to take a look and analyze what the fire department's doing, how things are handled, what kind of runs we're doing, and what the cash flow is, sans any other locations, because it's just Groveland Township now, and without any anomalies into the calculations. So while we get grants from time to time for different things, we have put none of that in the financial analysis we're doing here. We're trying to look at what will the fire department look like and operate under, what conditions going forward in a typical normal year starting after this year. So that's the whole purpose of this study, really, to see if we're doing things right and whether or not we can save any additional money. At the meeting, we are going to discuss the findings just like we are here today on this video. At the meeting, we engage the public input. If you have comments or concerns you want to tell us about, feel free to either email us or call the office anytime, and we'll be happy to answer questions for you. And then at the end of this and at the end of the meeting, we were looking for recommendations. First of all, let me show you this chart, because the first part we wanted to look at was how are we doing as a community from a growth perspective. If you know, you go to some place like Novi or Northfield, they have huge amounts of growth and expansion. They're building huge subdivisions, many new commercial buildings, and as a result of that, they get a lot of new tax dollars every year. In our case, here's the chart that shows you what our census numbers were all the way back to 1960. In 1960, we were only 2,404 people in the township. You can see that in the 70s and 80s, we got up into the 4,000 to 5,000 range, and by the year 2000, we actually hit our peak, which was 6,150 residents. In the year 2000 is when we built the new station that's on Grange Hall Road at Josman. And we did that in part largely because we were trying to attack the ISO insurance rating for all of us on our homeowners insurance. So we wanted to drive that rating into the good zone, which means a lower number, so that we could all save money on our homeowners insurance, and it worked. But after 2000, by the year 2010, we had all seen the results of the great, usually referred to as the Great Recession of 2009, and the property values tanked. We lost about 43% of our state equalized value in property taxes. Many of us, almost everybody, saw some reductions on their homeowners' property taxes, and we lost a bunch of population. By 2010, not only did we lose 43% of our property value, but we also lost 11% of our population. So the current census number for the Groveland Township area is 5476 from 2010. Now next year, they're going to take a new census, and we hope that the number's better than what they're projecting. But if you look on this chart, you'll see that SEMCOG, the Southeast Michigan Organization of Governments, that does all the forecasting for municipalities in southeastern Michigan, anticipates that 20 years from now, we will be at about 5,815 people, which means if you go back 20 years and forward 20 years in that 40-year span, they don't think we will be as big as we were in the year 2000. Now, I hope they're wrong and we get at least up to around 6,000, but this is the forecast from SEMCOG. And the value in this is to say There is no way that we are going to grow our tax base into some huge growth potential to help us fund whatever our cost issues are going forward. And the second way we checked it is we looked at the number of average homes built in the township. Prior to 2008, we were building about 32 homes a year, which for us was pretty good growth. In the last 10 years, our average new home builds per year works out to 5.3 houses a year, or an 83.5% reduction in new homes. Again, there's no way that we are going to grow to the extent that we would have big increases in the tax base. And really, in part, some of that is by design in our area. Most of us moved out here for the same reason, and all three of the master plans that I've worked on have emphasized basically the rural up north open space, large lot, low density that we have here and that we all moved out for. The flip side of that is it's hard to get a lot of tax base because the state of Michigan owns a quarter of the township, and the the county owns a bunch of property. When you put it all together, 40% of townships area is untaxable to us because it's owned by the state or the county. So we're not going to see a huge tax spike that's going to help us. This next chart really is some of the statistics. When we started looking now, we've identified we can't grow our way out of a problem. What are the actual contacts or the runs that we're doing in the fire department? And in the area of mutual aid, because mutual aid is what makes all of the fire departments out here work well together, everybody kind of helps each other out and does some aids. The guideline from Oakland County's Medical Control Board is that you should be doing about 5% of your runs as mutual aid because they want you to try and staff up to meet your own needs primarily. Well, we looked at ours for the last 12 months, and what we found is we did 32 mutual aids to Brandon Township. We did 16 to the Village of Holly. We did 13 to the North Oakland County Fire Authority, which is basically Holly Township and Rose. And we did 65 to Springfield Township. This means that when we look at what we're doing, we are doing roughly 14.3% of our runs outbound are for mutual aid, as opposed to the 5% guideline that the county suggests. On the inbound side, we've only had about 12 for the whole year, and so it's about 1.4% of our runs are inbound mutual aid. When you look at that, you have to say, why is it that we're doing 10 times as many out to other communities as they're actually doing into us? This has got to mean that we're helping a lot of other communities, to a greater extent than they're helping us. Now, we're not saying we shouldn't be doing mutual aid. It makes the system work. We're just kind of questioning, why is it 10 outbound to everyone inbound? The next thing we looked at in analyzing the runs was this chart about the runs that we have in the recreational areas, because we do get a lot of visitor traffic to the township, and we anticipated that might be a significant amount of our runs. But here's what we actually found. Mount Holly has 37 runs a year, and that's basically people in skiing accidents either bumping into each other or a tree or something. In the parks, both Groveland Oaks and Holly State Park, we had a total of 16. Really not that many. The Renaissance Festival, which we all know is in the late summer, had 17. And then on I-75, there are 73 runs that we responded to. And this is because we get a lot of runs that don't really end up being anything. We get a call from a Good Samaritan that sees a car steaming on the side of the road, calls 911 and said, hey, I see a car, I think it's on fire. And what it really is a overheat, and then by the time the truck gets there, the guy's got the car started and he's gone. Now, there are accidents as well, but a lot of them are basically no real activity, if you will. There were 73 of those. So this following chart is really taking a look at how many runs are we doing in Groveland Township that are not even within the 36 square miles of Groveland Township. They're either mutual aid runs out to other departments, or they're outside of our area and we're responding to somebody. Well, we had 126 that were mutual aid to the various communities. We did 17 in the Renaissance Festival, and even though we do handle that part of Holly by a mutual agreement that was set up some years ago, if you don't know it already, the Renaissance Festival is not really in Groveland Township, just the very front part of the parking lot. The festival itself is in Holly Township. And then outside of that area, on the portion of Holly that we actually handled, there were another 40 runs. Well, we looked at all of that and put it together and said, That's 21% of the total runs that we do are not even in our township. So we went on and then we said, how do we compare to some of the other townships around us? We looked at all of the townships that surround us. And what we have is Holly Township has about 5,300 people. They have one station, 3.5 mil tax, and they do provide ALS. They're part of NACFA. Groveland Township has about 5,500 people, 2 stations, 3.8 mil tax because we lowered it this year for the first time, and 2 ALS stations. The village of Holly has about 6,000 people, 1 station. They do have ALS, but I can't tell you what they spend on it because in villages they tax differently than townships. Frequently police, fire, and other things are all mixed together in one millage rate for the village. Rose Township has about 300 people, 1 station, a millage rate just over 2, and does ALS as well. Now here's an interesting one and why we had so many runs down to Springfield. They have 14 or 15,000 people down there now. They have 3 stations. Their millage rate is just under 2, but they do not do medical transports. And that is the reason why we had 65 runs into Springfield. Springfield's actually covered by the ambulance company, which is Star Ambulance. There's typically 1 ambulance from Star either down on M59 in Highland or maybe at the Kroger off of Dixie Highway. That tries to cover the 15,000 people in Springfield, but obviously it can't do it, so we end up doing a lot of medical transports down to Springfield, and frankly, so does NACFA doing it on the south end. So they have 3 stations, but they have no ALS transport service. Then we looked at Brandon Township, which is 15, but it's probably 16 or 17,000 now. They have 3 stations, a millage rate of 4.39, and they have 2 ALS crews on for those 3 stations. What you might find is interesting, we did about 30 some runs down to Brandon, and the reason for that is we believe that when you look at Independence Township, you see the 35,000. They're really about 36,000 right now. They have 3 stations, a millage rate of 3.4. They do ALS, but they only have 2 ALS crews. Well, if you look at all of this, what we think is happening is everybody has roughly 5,000 to 6,000 people per station and provides ALS, except Independence, which has about 12,000 people per station and about 18,000 people per ALS crew. So we feel that they are, and I know they are, getting a lot of mutual aid from Brandon on the north and Waterford Township on the south. That's how they're getting them done. Well, when you pull people out of Brandon, it kind of has a concomitant effect down the line. That's why I think we had 30 some runs into Brandon from our station in the year. And we noticed that when Brandon staffed up its 3rd station on Oakwood and made it go live all the time, the amount of runs that we were doing into Brandon dropped rather precipitously. So this is part of the reason why we are doing so many runs elsewhere. If people are not staffed adequately to cover their own runs, they start getting pulled in all different directions and other people start filling the voids, and we have been doing, frankly, I think way more than our fair share on mutual aid because we're doing 10 runs out for everyone in that we get. Now, if you look at the next consideration after we've looked at where do our runs go and how many do we have, we find out that there's an industry-wide problem in every fire department, and every state knows this. It's very difficult and hard to keep and hire what most people call volunteers, and we internally call usually shift and premium or on-call people. And the reason for that is the pay for these on-call volunteer firefighters is very low. It has not kept pace. We raised ours about $1 last year, but it's way behind the 8 ball. Groveland's full-time people, full-time, not the on-call people, start out at about 45,000. There are some higher and there are some lower, but 45,000 is kind of the national average, and that's where we start our full-time people. Groveland's volunteer pay, the on-call people, is between $11 and $16, and NACFA, the North Oakland Fire Authority that's next door, is between $17 and $20. They have set the high water mark for what people get for pay in the volunteer and on-call base. And what we're saying is we have a problem that has to be addressed. You cannot be in a marketplace competing for qualified help if everybody next door to you is paying $4 or $5 an hour more. We think that has to be addressed. In addition, long term, our chief, who has done a wonderful job, Kevin Mason, also pulls a lot of shift time. And we think it's not really fair in the long haul. He needs to have somebody to pull that shift time so that he has more time to do some of the management function. Those are areas that we think need to be addressed in our fire department. This next chart is kind of showing you how a budget for the fire department works once you take out any anomaly, one-time kind of deals. And there's really only 3 or 4 items in the budget that ever change in the township's fire budget. Basically, most of the cost items like insurance, fuel and heat and utilities and all that stuff, those costs are pretty much the same just about every year. What changes is the amount of money they get in from the fire millage that we all pay on our property taxes. So I took the new state equalized value for Groveland Township, which is about $229,700,000 for this year, times it by the 3.8, and that means the fire department will get about $872,000 or $3,000 from the property tax millage this year going forward. The rest of these numbers on this chart are all the same pretty much every year except for the one that says ambulance. What we did is take a look at the ambulance runs and said not how much we're collecting this year, and I'll explain why, but what are the runs that we're doing actually putting into the system. When we do ambulance runs, there's a huge latency factor on how they get collected. In fact, today we're still collecting on ambulance runs that we did in the year 2013 because the people that pay for them may not have had insurance and they might be sending us $10 or $5 a month till it's paid off, and it takes a long time. So I went back to the people that actually do our ambulance billing and I said, I don't want old numbers. I want to know for the runs that we're doing today, what is the average revenue we get for an ambulance run? And that average figure is about $424 per run. It can be as high as $800 and as low as around $200, but the average works out to $424. And I checked it with another department, NTPVA, whose is about $420, so it's right in the ballpark. Now, that's how we got the $196,350. That represents the number of runs we've done this year by that $424 number. And when you look at it, you could see running the fire department is just under $1.2 million in revenue coming in. When you look at what the typical expenses are, again, not much changes here. Our salary adjustments are typically 2%. That's kind of a COLA factor. We work that into the salaries here. The benefits and the other charges are in here. The one that has a big variable is the one that says volunteer shift pay. And that's the one where we spent about $362,000 on the 12-month period. What I did is calculate a rough number for what it would be if we tried to match NTPVA's pay so that we're competitive in that marketplace for personnel. When you put that pay in and the FICA and the Medicare and the work comp and that, you come out somewhere around $134,000. If I add that adjustment that we need to do to the volunteer pay to the rest of the typical costs, it ends up meaning the outflow for the fire department's about $1.3 million. Well, if you take $1.3 million and you have $1.1 million in income, it leaves you short. So what I did on this next chart is I took that shortfall and times it by various millage rates to see what it would be to make it whole. And here's what we have. A typical home value in Groveland Township is $250,000, so its taxable value should be $125,000 times the millage rate. That's how they do your taxes. There's a lot of other homes at different prices. You can do your own, but the other big block is probably $400,000 homes in that area. And if you take the state equalized value, it's half of that, $200,000 times the millage rate. If you look at that, I've showed what it would be if we were back to the 3.5 mills that the township board made a commitment to bring us back to eventually when our tax base came back up after the Great Recession. And it's just about where it was now. So we reduced it this year from the 3.94 that it's been for 9 years down to 3.8, and our goal would be to try and get it down to 3.5. and that shows you what the rate for your property tax bill would be for the fire department under 3.5. It's either $437 in the one case, $700 in the larger home. If we leave it at the 3.8, it's the $475 or the $760, and if we take care of the money that we need to take care of the shortfall, and this doesn't include finding a replacement for the shift time that the chief is currently putting in and working 1,000,000 hours for us, and it doesn't also include the fact that we are going to end up losing the revenue from the ambulance runs we do to Springfield because they're getting ready to be able to do their own transports, and the runs we did down there, the 60-some runs, represented about 25,000. Without taking that revenue out, without putting the cost in for the replacement for the chief, if we went to 4.929 on the mills, you can see what the cost generation would be on the homeowner's property tax for just the fire department. If we put those other two cost items in to be really accurate about what it looks like going forward, you'll really get up into the 5.2 to 5.5 range, okay? This is basically saying three things. First of all, there is no way that the growth in Groveland Township, and it's by design, that's why we moved out here, is going to be explosive enough to build up the tax base to the point where we can fund any shortfalls that we have going forward. The second issue was to look at the number of runs we have, and it's very clear that we are doing 10 runs out for every one we have in mutual aid, and out of the runs that we have left, 1 out of 5 isn't even physically in Groveland Township. So we asked, and the reason we're doing this is to figure out, well, what can we do to try and fix the problem? There's really only a limited number of options. I mean, you can leave it the way it is and pray for a Hail Mary pass of unknown origin and say, maybe people will still work for us even if we are paying substandard wages, and we'll just keep on trying to figure out how to keep it going the way it is. I don't think that's a realistic answer, and I do not think it's fair to shift and volunteer people. It's certainly not a workable plan going forward. We could raise the taxes to take care of all of the shortfall, and that would put us in the 5 to 5.5 range for a millage tax, which, by the way, would become the absolute highest operating fire millage for any fire department in the entire state of Michigan. The average in the state is something like 1.3. There's a lot of little fire departments. In the county, it's about 2.4, I think. But we would be moving into the 5 to 5.5 range, and that would be the absolute highest for any city, village, or township anywhere in the state of Michigan, and by quite a bit, too. I think that's kind of hard to swallow when we're looking at our size and the fact that we're doing so many runs for other people. The third choice we looked at was we're looking at the possibility of seeing whether or not we should join the North Oakland Fire Authority. And the reason we looked at that is because all three townships, Rose, Holly, and Groveland, are the last three general law townships up in this corner of the township. It's a different governmental structure than the charter townships. All three townships have roughly 5,000 to 6,000 residents in them. All three townships share the Michigan State Police Detachment that's located here in Groveland, and two of the three share the North Oakland Fire Authority. We thought that was the most likely candidate to look at as a possible consolidation effort. If we did that, we would become an equal 1/3 partner in the consolidation of the North Oakland Fire Authority. But there's another option, and Chief Kevin Mason is taking a look at seeing if he can find a way to restructure it so that when we get done using a temporary grant that we have right now, which will cover some of these shortfalls for about 2 years, what are the other alternatives of what we can do? The whole purpose of this study is really to try and find out and make sure we're doing our due diligence and responsibility to say, what are the issues facing the township? And in this case, it's the cost of the fire department. What can we do going forward that will help us mitigate that problem? And what's the most cost-effective way? Contrary to what you may or may not have heard, we have not signed any contracts. We have no formal proposals. We are trying to get the balance of that information. We have had some discussions which tend to lead us to believe we think there's a very viable way to do one or both of the latter two options. And that's what we're trying to get down to. Here's part of the information you need to keep in mind when you go through all of this. We looked at our records and we found out that in the year 2013, we did about 2,247 runs, I think. This year, we're going to do about 950 runs. That is a significant drop. We've dropped more than half the runs that we were doing in the year 2013 to 2019. Not only did we drop more than half the runs, we have exactly the same headcount staffing that we had in 2013. And out of the remaining less than half the runs we have, 20% of them are not even in our township, and we're doing 10 mutual aids to everyone in. I think this begs the question, are we doing things as efficiently as we possibly can? And to that end is the reason for this analysis. I know a lot of things have been said. Much of it is not true or accurate. I want you to understand this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. So as we get done with this, we hope to have this information in the next couple of weeks. It's not that hard to price the options out. We will be doing it most likely at the January board meeting so that you can attend and hear and see what we're saying. Before we do anything, we'll have contracts and terms and conditions ironed out so that we know what to anticipate once the grace period, if you will, that we're going through right now is covered by the temporary grant that we got from the government. It's called a SAFER grant. This is the whole purpose of this study and the reason for analysis. And I think it is incumbent on the township board to be good stewards of your money and try and figure out where should we be spending our money, what are the needs of the township going forward, and what's the most efficient method to try and get that done. This is not about taking or casting aspersions on the fire department. Quite the contrary. We think our fire department does very good work. We think they're excellent personnel. We think that they are not wasting money, and we do not think they're overpaid. The issue is, are we as efficient as we can be? And I think it would be hard to argue when we're doing less than half the runs we did in 2013, and a fifth of the runs we're doing are not even in our township, that maybe that needs to be looked at and see if we can do it a different way. And that's what the purpose of this analysis is. Do we really look at better scenario if we're part of North Oakland Fire Authority, keeping our stations, both of them here, keeping the stations, the equipment, and the personnel that we've got going, and figuring out if there are some synergies and economies of scale there, or do we change the structure of the way we operate here and look at that as the alternative? When we have those answers, we'll bring them to you, and we should have them in just a few weeks. So until the next video, Groveland, I hope you'll take the opportunity to look at this information. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to call or write us or email, whatever is easiest. We're happy to try and answer those questions for you. I hope you have a great day, and if I don't talk to you before Christmas, have a nice holiday. Thank you.